Hi, welcome to another episode of Vantage Point. I'm very glad today. I've always been discussing science on Astro Awani, but sometimes to get an eminent person to speak about this is so hard. But today, a very prominent person in science and science advocacy and diplomacy, Dr. Sonia Ortega, practically dropped by the studio, and I will steal 25 minutes of her time to discuss about science, development and diplomacy, and how the education system is a crucial cog in the wheel for this to happen. However, before I go to the nitty-gritty of how do we develop our education system, a new strategy of looking at it, first and foremost, I've interviewed about 12 Nobel laureates in the past 3 years. In fact, yesterday I was at one session with Professor Pete Doherty, and one thing that he said struck me very, very hard. He said at the end of the day, no matter what we look at, we must first appreciate the ecosystem around us and understand that first. That's the first step of being inquisitive, for example. So before I go to the pedagogy or the techniques and stuff, how do we put natural inquisitiveness back into our next generation, for example? Because at the end of the day, we're supposed to be born with this free-spirited thinking, and it's our nature to go about and discover. However, as we move along from the 20th century into the knowledge economy that we call it now, we are now facing the fact that we have to instill the spirit of being curious into a person and asking and teaching them to be inquisitive. So isn't that the first barrier, actually, to really open the floodgates of science and technology?
Yes, well, children are naturally born curious, and you don't have to teach a child how to be curious. Children are always asking questions. Why is the sky blue? Why the fish swim? Why the airplanes stay up in the air?
Yes.
So they were always asking questions, and I think that the main goal of education is to encourage that curiosity, because that's where science starts, with curiosity and discovery. It's sometimes people think that science is a matter of learning facts and plugging numbers into a formula, but science is about discovery. And if we instill that in children and the teachers that teach the science, that this is about asking questions. Scientists, that's what they do. They ask questions about the natural world. They ask many questions about issues that are of interest, and that's what produced the discoveries, and that's what happens, how science is done. So in the schools, what you would like to see, and what I think it's happening now, you're using more the inquiry-based methodology to ask questions and have the children discover what's around them, find different ways of answering the questions about the real world, about how science is relevant in their lives. They have to make that connection. I think that one of the important things that you need to do, or everybody needs to do in the schools, is to connect the sciences with the real world, make it relevant for people.
Agree. That's why it's a long process from, MOUs being signed in New York. But one of the long benefit of that now is that we have you for 2 months, and you've been here for a few weeks already, and you'll be partnering MIGHT to look at peer-reviewed grant system and looking at strengthening the science, technology, engineering, and maths education in Malaysia. But from the macro discussion that we have initially, I would like to link that to even President Barack Obama and his administration is looking at bringing up the excellence of STEM or STEM in the education in America. And when I was reading about that issue months ago, and I was like, but this is America. It's the biggest economy of the world, the biggest superpower around, and there's a decline over the years in the performance of students in school, science, technology, engineering, and maths. And if we look at smaller countries like South Korea, for example, who have almost the same background with Malaysia, maybe in the 1960s and 70s. But now, they are talking to people like the biggest company in the world in terms of value, like Apple. And we don't even have a smartphone company almost half as big, for example. So there will be cases around the world where science, technology, engineering and maths have propelled the whole nation forward. But I guess for countries like Malaysia, we have to find our own balance. So maybe in this instance, looking at the cradle to career system that has been done in America, for example, it's not necessarily to be replicated. Maybe you can share your views on this. But it's finding things that work somewhere else, but trying to match it to the needs around here. Is that how you see it?
Well, what happens, models are always developed in many parts of the world. And the issue of science education, I'm learning as I'm meeting people from different parts of the world, are more or less universal. This need to promote science in schools and encourage STEM learning, it's not an issue that is troubling one country. It's an issue that is troubling many countries. And so you have to make the good connections with what's going on in the world. Now, in order to decide what's relevant to each country, it's up to each country to decide.
Yes.
And I think in terms of, you take a model and then you adapt it to your own reality, because the realities of one country are different than the realities of other countries. So you take the best out of one model and another model, and then you decide if it applies to your own reality. And so it's not a matter of replicating something, it's a matter of taking the best out of what has been produced in other parts of the world and see how that can improve the conditions of Malaysia or any other country.
So I have to go for the first commercial break, but once we are back, it's always nice and enlightening to have a view from the outside. But now you're in the inside. So you have been on video conferencing even before you landed in this country. So maybe we can steal your thoughts on one or two micro focus here that you have seen so far. And maybe you have a different conception when you were there, but once here, you see it in different light. One or two instances so that we can really give concrete examples to what we discussed just now. That we'll discuss after this short break.
Setiap Rabu, alami kehidupan penuh ekstrim. Atlet dan penggiat sukan lasak di gelanggang mereka. Cara mereka melihat dunia dan kehidupan amat berbeza. Di mana bandar dan persekitaran kita adalah taman permainan mereka. Bersama Ian Johan Arif dan Dahlia Shazwan.
I'm Jeremiah Smith. I'm a pro BMXer. Check out Adrenaline on Astro Awami.
Lagi aku tak benarkan kau keluar. Kau jangan keluar.
Isnin, Teleprima membawakan
Aku nak ingatkan kau. Jangan ganggu anak aku lagi.
Saya akan tunggu Ira sampai bila-bila.
Ira buat hal lagi.
Ini soal yang terbaik untuk anak aku.
Saya hantar balik ya.
Syurga di Mana. Isnin, hanya yang terbaik di Astro Prima.
Thanks to GSIAC initiatives and also now with my JHTO Might, we have Dr. Sonia Ortega, science envoy, who've been, wearing many hats actually. Marine biologist by training, but also a lot of years in the National Science Foundation in America, a lot of programs looking at education and enabling young scientists to get grants and stuff like that. But you're here to look at Malaysia now. And if you can share with us your thoughts so far, maybe giving one or two specific examples of areas that you're looking at.
Yes, I see a lot of potential here. It's a country that I haven't been before, and I'm very pleased to see what's happening in many areas, what's happening in science, what's happening in education. I I see that Malaysia is an up-and-coming country with, as I said, with lots of potential in many different areas. For example, I had meetings with people, and we've been looking at the potential that Malaysia has in terms of biodiversity. That is very unique.
Okay.
And there are many areas in biodiversity that have not been studied before.
Okay, agreed.
And that has potential not only for Malaysia, but also for science
Yes.
in general. So that's one area that has a lot of potential for Malaysia in terms of progress, in terms of contributions to science.
I think, my mother would have loved if I were to become a scientist before, but I chose a
Yeah.
different path. But one thing where we do share something in common was Jacques Cousteau, and that inspired you
Yes.
to be a marine biologist.
Right.
And I've always been amazed that the heritage of Southeast Asia and the archipelago has always been marine-based, from trade before, and but there's more that we can discover and help bridge to the modern world nowadays, on things like that. So how do you tackle, in one sense, from year 1 in primary school right up to year 5 in secondary school here, we are teaching them through the subject of science and maths and geography, for example. But maybe the free-spiritedness of our forefathers in this archipelago was, for example, just to go out in the morning, breathe the fresh air, look at the greeneries and the blue ocean, for example, and take on the world. So maybe putting things in classroom needs to bridge the connection to the outside world, like what you have alluded to earlier. How has the United States tackled this, from No Child Left Behind, for example? Because maybe if I take the theory of multiple intelligence of Howard Gardner, for example, just because I'm not so strong in maths and science doesn't mean I don't have that scientific approach to things. It's just that maybe I like things differently and approach it differently, for example. So if we were to appreciate our biodiversity, coupled and layered on top of that the multicultural, multi-religious society that we have, so maybe we need to be a bit more innovative on how we bring this to the classroom.
Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about the natural sciences, because yesterday, as a matter of fact, I had tea with the ambassador of the U.S. and a selected group of people representing different organizations here in Malaysia, and we precisely discussed that issue, that now in the area of technology, high technology, cell phones, and all the tools that we have now, that the way that we were raised in a sense, exposed to the natural world, is lacking now, and that perhaps we need to have a better balance in the way that we bring the children to the real world, to their backyards, to the field, to experience nature, but also use the technology to teach them more. Yes. So it's a good combination of the technology with the exposure to the natural world, and then you get the best of both worlds, because that needs, it's perhaps with we are seeing in the U.S. that children are not going outside because they're texting a lot of times.
Agreed.
So we need to have we need to encourage parents, we need to encourage communities, we need to encourage schools to provide that balance. So then the children and the young people develop that love for nature, continue that love for discovery, and use the tools. There are fantastic things that you can see now on apps and on the internet that complement what you see in nature.
Inspiration, I guess, is a very crucial thing. If you haven't seen the Frenchman going underwater and looking at marine life, for example, and too bad for me, I only get to go to the Nobel ceremonies in Stockholm after I've already been a journalist for a number of years. Otherwise, I would have dropped everything and become a scientist, because it's so inspiring. But I guess sometimes we have to inspire the younger generation.
Yes.
And one model in the United States that maybe Malaysia should look at more, and I know you'll be looking at this also, is how do you match, for example, an institution of higher learning with education at lower levels. So here, if you notice, if you've gone around our universities, the first thing you see will be toll gates and guards at the entrance. But in America, a whole town or a whole small city is a university, and people mingle and intermingle inside it. So I guess opening up the box physically, not just in geology, is very crucial. So if we can make this strategic match not only one school to a university, because there's lesser number of universities in Malaysia, maybe one university to a 10-kilometer radius kind of schools, so that can really directly inspire.
Yes, absolutely. I have been very fortunate to have been working with a program at the National Science Foundation that has brought universities and schools together. This program was the brainchild of a former National Science Foundation director, Dr. Rita Colwell, who was actually a science envoy here in Malaysia last year. And the idea was to connect graduate students in the sciences with schools and teachers, precisely to inspire the young people. One of the reasons was that if you have graduate students who are doing sciences and they come to the schools, they can be role models for young people. There's a young person who has never seen a woman engineer, for example, and they can say, well, I can also be an engineer, being a woman engineer, or there are students who have never considered being a mathematician or an astronomer or a marine biologist or any field of sciences. So that is an inspiration, that you can have those graduate students coming to the schools to inspire, but also to share their science, to share their knowledge. And then the graduate students and the teachers can work together on a mutually beneficial relationship. Because a lot of scientists are trained to do science, but they don't know how to teach. So when you bring the graduate students to a school and then you put them together with teachers, the teachers can share with the graduate students their techniques for teaching, how to reach to the young people. And the graduate students can bring the research to the schools. So this is more like a symbiotic relationship, if I use the term, since I'm a biologist.
I like that, because I have to go for the second commercial break, but once we are back, it's not a top-down approach. This is how we see it. This is how the education system for the country is going to be for the next 50 years. Whatever it is, must really have ears close, very close on ground, and tap into the vibrancy that the community already has. It cannot just be a top-down policy and people will adopt science, technology, engineering and maths. So after this short break, maybe I can steal your thoughts another time for how do you see any policy that we have really being open, and fluid enough to be this dynamic, because we cannot just instill STEM in schools or university. We need the surrounding ecosystem, the parents, or whoever else, to have lifelong learning. So everybody will be enriching the whole system. That we'll discuss after this break.
Toyo Tires, tayar rasmi yang mencapai prestasi gemilang.
One thing I share with the scientists, even though I'm not a scientist, is that I have to be inquisitive, to be a journalist, and over 2 decades, it has brought me to a lot of areas and new knowledge for me. And one thing, even locally, when I went to Sabah and Sarawak, every time when I go into the interior based communities, sometimes I learn from them and not the other way around, because they have satellite like Astro is beamed into a lot of longhouses, for example, in our rainforest in Sabah and Sarawak. And the way they ask me questions about topics like this, they will ask me things like, yes, so you're talking about lifelong learning. So how do we do that without leaving our ecosystem? Why wouldn't people from the outside appreciate the rainforest for how we see it, not just another plot of land to be cleared for modern development? So these are tough questions that people on who's not in the urban areas asking already. So I guess any policies that we have will have to tap into the vibrancy of the communities, the already inherited legacies and wisdom of knowledge, but just to bridge that to a more directed and strategic overview of science and technology. Your views?
Yes, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because having been trained as a marine biologist and more in the ecological area, one of the issues that we looked at, for example, through the Ecological Society of America, is to acknowledge and learn from what we call traditional ecological systems. And then we learn from ways that, for example, people in the Pacific Northwest look at salmon fishing, which is one of the traditional ecological ways of doing things. We looked at how Native Americans have harvested. We looked at how they look at astronomical things. We go to Arctic areas and look at the way that they have looked at climatic changes over the years. There is a lot of knowledge that traditional ecological communities have done, and I am sure here in Malaysia you have a lot of traditions, and there is a lot of learning. So the learning doesn't come from the top down. You have to integrate the communities as well, because there is a lot of learning, and it doesn't have to be only one way of learning. One of the things that we have to acknowledge is that there is more than one way of teaching and more than one way of learning. And different people learn in different ways. A lot of native communities have their own way of learning, and it's not like something is better than other things. It's that things are different. And we have to acknowledge that the differences are good. We have to look at that positive side, that the knowledge that generated by different types of communities, and integrate them instead of separate them. Integrate them into the overall teaching and learning.
That's why when I was looking at Dr. Colwell's approach of bringing research to the classroom, for example. So maybe as we go along, if we really open things up, so the engineers wouldn't be building highways across forests, for example, that will make the habitat of the endangered tigers compromised, because the engineers think that this is best way, practical way, civil-wise, engineering-wise, and otherwise, to build the highway, but they're actually cutting across of the footprint of the tiger, because the tiger cannot live in the forest that is compartmentalized and not work for their habitat, for example. So these are the problems that we want to solve. So I guess linking it also to the social sciences that will give wisdom, because every time I have the Nobel winners of economy, I mean 4 of them already over the last 3 years, and I ask about the subprime crisis, for example, and until now this it's so complex that there's no one short answer to how it happened and why it happened. So yes, we want people good in mathematics, actual sciences, but it's not just to project monetary rewards. And I've read an article where you say that if you do something that you like and you're good at, the money will come later. So I guess we want our cake and we want to eat it too, as far as STEM is concerned, because we want to produce for the next generation, because there are many challenges, climatic changes and stuff, a balanced individual that will know how to appreciate science and technology, but at the same time respecting and knowing the environment around them.
Yes, I agree with you that we really need to train responsible citizens that are lifelong learners. I think that it's very important to foster, to encourage, and when we look at how can we integrate the issues that you're bringing. You have an engineer who wants to build the bridge and the issues of the tigers. One approach that is very important, and that we are looking at it more and more as scientists, is that instead of isolating the different sciences or the different types of science, integrate them into an issue. For example, you look at sustainability, sustainable cities, and it takes a group of people from social scientists, architects, engineers, economists, ecologists, the whole range of people to look into a problem or into an issue. So that integrated approach, instead of only looking at it from one particular area. We are doing more and more research now, and we are encouraging more research worldwide, actually, into this interdisciplinary research, because first, science has no borders, no boundaries, and there are some issues that are global. We know global climate change is an issue, water is another important issue, and it takes expertise from all the different fields.
To come together.
You need to have the expertise from all the different groups and all the different fields to solve big problems. It takes more than just one type of person. It takes many different types
Very
of
well
expertise.
said, because I couldn't have ended this discussion in a better way. Thank you so much, Dr. Ortega.
You're welcome.
And the few weeks that you have left, I would beg for you to come again to Astro Awani, because we're just hitting the surface and we can go a bit deeper if you can make it the next time around. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you to you for making time for Vantage Point, and we'll see you again in another episode very, very soon. Goodbye.